YouTube, it's Multiplier here, and yes, a brand new style of video starts now, where I review not a sample pack or a keyboard or a set of headphones, but instead this guy right here, Steve Aoki, and not just Steve Aoki, but a documentary about him called I'll Sleep When I'm Dead. It just came out on Netflix, and I've watched it and I thought I'm going to tell you all about it because it's fantastic and definitely worth a watch with your eyes. Basically, it's all about Steve's life and how he got to where he is, his motivations, ambitions, all that sort of stuff. But for me, the most interesting angle was his relationship to Rocky Aoki, which is his father. Rocky Aoki was a ridiculous human being. He was a professional wrestler. He had a crazy successful business with his restaurant chain, Benihana, or whatever it was called, essentially pioneering an entire genre of restaurant business in America. He had many world records in hot air ballooning, in racing boats on water. I think he was even world backgammon champion at one stage. I'm not even making that up. In fact, let me look it up. It's absolutely insane. Look, he won a world record title in backgammon only 4 years after learning to play. I mean, what kind of guy is this? Steve's basically spending his whole life trying to live up to this legacy that Rocky laid down, both in terms of business, fame, money, athletic ability, intelligence, bravery. I mean, all these things you want as a person, it seems like Rocky Aoki did to the very max, apart from one, which was he almost never saw Steve, so it's a strange relationship they had, and that's what they dig into mostly in the documentary, and to me, that's the most interesting part of the whole Steve Aoki story. But also, it feels like a story that hasn't quite finished yet. I mean, yes, Steve Aoki is one of the biggest DJs in the world, and his record label's doing insanely well, and he has all these business ventures and stuff like that, but in comparison to the Rocky Aoki story, which overshadows everything, it almost feels like Steve is making his way. He hasn't quite got there yet, but also he kind of has, but kind of hasn't. It's weird, it's quite hard to put your finger on, and maybe that's the mistake of the documentary makers. I have no idea. Either way, it's definitely worth watching as a documentary on Netflix. It puts a lot more context and perspective behind the whole Steve Aoki thing. But I do have one big criticism of the film as a film, not the Steve Aoki story, but the actual film. And that is the narrative was a little bit confused and the editing wasn't the best, to be completely honest. Yes, I'm being very, very picky, but if you compare it to, say, the Swedish House Mafia documentary, I'll Leave You Behind, or whatever it's called. No. Leave You Alone. It's got leave in it. Whatever the film about Swedish House Mafia was called, if you compare the narrative in the Swedish House Mafia documentary to Steve Aoki's, it's much, much better. The whole documentary behind the Swedish House Mafia thing flows through because there's this underlying narrative of them building up to this new, or not the final show ever, or whatever it was. What I'm trying to say is the documentary itself of the Steve Aoki story didn't quite have the proper narrative I was looking for. It was almost like they were focusing on the relationship between Steve and Rocky, but then not quite enough because then we're going off on tangents and then there wasn't a resolution with the Steve and Rocky thing. I don't know, I'm getting a bit picky, but I suppose that's the whole point of a review. And let's be honest, there are so many good documentaries out there, and it's such a good story, the Steve Aoki story, that I wish the storytelling part of the film was a little bit better. And while I've got your attention talking about movies on the Watching in Your Eyes and stuff, you should also watch the Swedish House Mafia film. I can't remember the name. I don't think the Swedish House Mafia one is on Netflix, so you might have to find it on Google or buy it off iTunes like I did. Also, there is one about Daft Punk. I would say the Swedish House Mafia one is the best, and then Steve Aoki, and then Daft Punk. And yeah, that's going to be my recommendations for today. And then as a bonus recommendation, watch Spinal Tap. It's got nothing to do with EDM or fact. Your feature presentation brought to you by Multiplier on YouTube, the Steve Aoki story. I'll Sleep When I'm Dead. I personally like to sleep at nighttime because that's when it's dark and that's when it's easiest to sleep, and then you can get a good night's sleep, wake up fresh for the day and do lots of things, and then you're not tired. So don't sleep when you're dead, sleep at nighttime. I've been Multiplier. I will catch you guys on the flippity flip.